Alrighty, folks. It is 3 p.m. Let's go. So welcome to Making Peer-to-Peer Apps with Spritely Goblins. My name is Diana Fernanda Bell, and I only learned my talk had been accepted yesterday, so this might be a little unhinged. The truth is I've been writing poetry and a novel almost nonstop for weeks, and I haven't thought about software except to hate AI. I'm going to do my best with this time to show you why Spritely Goblins is cool and why it fits into a web that rocks. I've been writing software professionally for about 15 years. I cut my teeth in distributed databases like CouchDB, and from there became a... Oh, sorry, let me just keep going. And from there became a tooling freak in the PouchDB ecosystem along with tech like Hypercore, IPFS, OrbitDB. But you'll learn this about me quickly. I'm a hater. Nothing is good enough for a utopian, right? I fell into the peer-to-peer scene looking for something I would realize is much bigger than a website. I, like many people, was searching for the mutable successor to the torrent. Torrents gossip immutable data. When I download a torrent, I can verify an immutable hash to prove I'm getting the data I'm looking for. But nobody can update the torrent. This is fine for movies, which don't really change, but most data does eventually change. So we went a-looking for the torrent that could change. We sought a data structure that authors could modify and many people could gossip, which could serve as a building block in a distributed data architecture. With some hypothetical API, you could mark a data structure as mutable in this way and then share it with authenticated links, which your friends could use to gossip the thing. It could be a chat room, a virtual world, a media network, any sort of data, any sort of program made peer-to-peer with little more than tooling and vocabulary. Hypothetically, just like virtually no human force can prevent torrenting files, mutable torrents could facilitate a nigh immortal interactivity for any sort of application, for deduplication, for bandwidth sharing, uptime through redundancy, and however else the Sermon on the Mount goes. This hypothetical successor has been like a holy grail to freaks like me, but every design comes with assumptions that work like handcuffs. Peer-to-peer architects have been frustratingly loath to lead with their chosen limitations, instead tending to chase crypto money with promises of building anything at all by using specialized structures like append-only logs, which famously and definitionally lack deletes. Again and again, architects would paper over shortcomings with hype, exploiting developers and users to waste time on nothing. The way that crypto money came to dominate the psychic and spiritual politics of my hobby specialty was another entry in a long series of sobering experiences in software as an industry, profession, and craft. But the dream doesn't need those assholes, right? My dream doesn't. Listen, library socialism called from the future, and they need an internet that actually works. The kind of sublime we really want for our software, our programs, our networks, is akin to the plumbing of your toilet. Essential, reliable, accountable, because otherwise your house fills up with shit. Just about nobody wants to think about where their shit goes, but thank goodness someone does. We could be those plumbers, and we could make aqueducts that last for thousands of years. The society we want to live in doesn't run on hype. It runs on toilets that flush, taps that run, plugs that power, and phones that ring. It runs on bridges that don't collapse just because private equity and your commute's investors shook hands. As experts, we know in fine detail what it technically takes to supply the system that such a society might necessitate. So how do we do it? This is why I'm so excited about Spritely Goblins as a tooling and application developer. It represents a paradigm that has proven capable with complex, secure distributed systems, which renders the most fundamental elements of distributed systems programming into elegant library imports, and provides robust networking support that, I shit you not, allows you to turn arbitrary data structures into the equivalent of magnet links. It does multiplayer right, and distributed systems are just multiplayer by another name. No fancy handcuffs preventing deletes, just a new way of thinking about things that puts permissions first. The catch is that it's in Guile, and it's under active development. But this work is being driven by some of the smartest and most capable people I know, and I can only say I have great faith in their character and acumen. Goblins already provides a comprehensive vocabulary to write complex distributed systems, not as servers handling requests, but peers exchanging capabilities. So let's dive into what it's like to use today. Code time. All right, so this is the part where I would have spent the preceding months making this code good. But instead, I'm going to show you what I do have, and we're going to walk through how it works and why it works, and then how it kind of fits into what a production application might actually be. So this idea is called the Goblins guest book. And the idea is that you, as a user, have a guest book that you can write in or anyone else can write in. I had an experience where I visited a friend in Austria when I was like 12, and he had a guest book in his living room, I guess you'd say. And people just sign it. So I, 12-year-old, was just reading through it and was like, look at this incredible intersection of culture and art from everyone who's ever entered this building. So what if we did that social-wise, right? If I had a guest book and people could write in it, but who's allowed to write in it? Who's allowed to modify it? These are permissions issues that represent the complexity of the granularity of trust. And this is where Goblins really shines, because it turns all of that granularity into capabilities. All of the functions, all of the things that you might do to your data become capabilities that you can just hand to someone. You want to write in my guest book? Here's a link, and you can use it to write. So this ultimately builds up to that, and we'll kind of see how. Goblins is currently written in Scheme, in Guile, and that's very, very cool. I don't write Scheme. The only Lisp that I know is Clojure, and I'm pretty happy with it as now. And so I mainly write JavaScript and Python when forced to use languages like that. And so recently, Goblins has been able to compile through WebAssembly so that you are able to use it in JavaScript. And so this is a JavaScript program utilizing Goblins, which is in Scheme. And so we are using Scheme from JavaScript, and it works. It's doing networking stuff. It's doing cool stuff. It's using Goblins, the whole dang thing. I'll explain how that works in a minute, because that gets into the like, hey, remember how I mentioned this is under active development part? So I'm just going to go through some of these concepts first, and I'll show you what it's kind of like to use this all in concert during development. So just going through this, we start with our imports. You can now import directly from URLs in JavaScript. That's kind of neat. So we start off with the thing that I use instead of React. I use a thing called Alchemize. I have a UUID library, DOM Purify, and Marked for handling Markdown. The idea is that guestbook entries are written as Markdown, but Markdown converts to HTML, and HTML can't be trusted, so you need DOM Purify to make sure it's safe. Because again, we're doing peer-to-peer stuff. People are exchanging untrusted data, right? They may trust each other, and they may get phished. So we have to be safe on their behalf. So I'm using PouchDB. It's my favorite little database to use in JavaScript. I can put it anywhere. It runs in the browser. It's based on CouchDB, which is a well-tested, battle-tested database. And this is like its little sibling. It just runs anywhere. So there's this database preamble where we set up our indices for queries. We set up some functions that we can use to modify the database, like save entry or update entry. And I don't actually want to talk about these functions because this talk is not about PouchDB. What I really want to talk about are these VAT objects. These are the rights, the capabilities that define your application's capabilities. And so the Goblins model is based on the actor model, but what it does practically, it calls the VAT model. The difference has not become important in my life. But it means that you have this thing called a VAT, and the VAT executes work. And so you give it capabilities and it executes those capabilities like functions. And because of how the VAT is contained, you get like transactionality and time travel. It does a lot of low-level stuff that can be really cool. Christine Lemmer-Weber used the time travel capabilities of a VAT to implement point-in-time saves in a game. And so instead of like saving a frame in a game, you could just go back to that frame in the game because it's stored in the VAT. Pretty neat stuff. But here, it's pretty simple. We've got all of the things that you might do to a guest book as these functions. And they're just functions. They're not special objects. These are not big fancy imports. They are just functions. And so, for example, here at the top, we have const add to guest book. And it's a function. It takes two parameters, a function called become, and our little PouchDB. And then it returns a function that takes content, like the text content of your post, and then a list of tags. And then it does this imperceptible line where it uses that become parameter as a function to update the guestbook object and modify the database. Become is how you modify actors. Rather than maintaining internal state, you call become in order to create another capability that has different characteristics. This is kind of a functional approach to it. Rather than having like variables that you mutate internally, you just reinstantiate the whole thing. This allows you to freeze its state more effectively, and some other sorts of things. So this is how it's done in Goblins. And so for each of these capabilities, we define how it's instantiated as a capability with that first arity, where we pass it become and the database, and then it hands you back the capability itself that you're able to use and call. And so for each of these, they are a capability that ultimately you could convert into a link that you could hand someone. And so read guestbook, for example, I could turn into a link. I could post it on my blog and say, hey, read my guestbook. I could even write to my guestbook on my blog, although that might be inadvisable. And so we'll see how these are called in just a moment. Next up, we have the templates. As I mentioned, I use HTML Alchemize I use Alchemist instead of React. Alchemist saves me the trouble of writing HTML or JSX. And so instead of writing either of those things, my templates are these list expressions. Hi, Christine. And so these list expressions are how I build up the templates. This might be a little hard to read, but you can... Thank you, Christine. I love you. Okay. All right. Okay, so we can see how markdown content is handled in the show entry. Alchemist provides this profane thing where normally all content that you pass through Alchemist is assumed to be unsafe, and so it gets escaped. And so if I pass markdown HTML to it, it gets escaped and doesn't show up the way you want. So you need to profane it in order to mark it like unsafe. And so in React, this is called set dangerously inner HTML, and they make it a long name so you never have to use it. I call it profane because I'm a witch. So these are the templates. Probably the biggest difference with Alchemist and something like React is that instead of providing handlers directly on like the onClick hook, you instead provide these IDs that are then templated onto, whatever the entity thing is. And then you listen on those IDs, you snatch onto them, and that's how you do interactivity with Alchemist. Okay, so now we get to the views. These are what actually construct the dynamic the dynamic presentation. They gather together your HTML, they add interactivity, so we'll go through it. Compose entry is a function that takes an HTML node, a vat, which we talked about for Goblins, and a capability, which is add to guestbook. So then it creates some of the IDs that we talked about that we will use to uniquely snag HTML elements. And then this line that starts with node replace children is what actually inserts the view into the DOM. And so it takes this edit entry template, which just returns a list expression. We run it through Alchemize, which turns it into an HTML node. We pass that to node.replaceChildren, and it's just bare JavaScript. It's just bare browser standards is what I mean. Then we use listen to, which is just shorthand for snagging an element and listening on an activity. So that when the save button is clicked, we grab its content, we format its tags, and then we call that do promise, where we take our capability and we call send on it, and then we hand it the content and tags. And just like when we defined add to guestbook, we defined it as something that returns a function that grants or that takes content and tags as parameters. And so here we are invoking that form, add to guestbook dot send. You are sending something to the capability. Because again, capabilities might exist on someone else's computer. When I hand you a capability, I'm not saying, cool, your computer now knows how to run the chat room. I'm saying, no, your computer has permission to ask me to do something to the chat room. Now, quick caveat, that means that if you who is running the chat room goes offline, the chat room ceases to exist. This is just something you have to live with. You can architect the data so that it is gossiped more, but this gets into data architecture, and I made this less than a day ago. So this is a quick example of using a vat to interact with the guestbook as a capability, with capabilities. And so we can actually see that here. So this is the guestbook for Goblins. This is what it looks like. So hello world. And there it is. And then down here we've got the list entries view, which does something very similar. You know, given a list of documents, it renders each one of them using the edit guestbook and remove from guestbook capabilities to sort of link to link those capabilities to each of the entries that are provided. We've got this main view down here where we just sort of tie everything together, where it adds the compose entry view to the compose ID. And then the way that the system updates when a new entry is added is that it actually uses this follow changes capability so that whenever the database updates in some way, we're able to receive information back that says update the UI. This is something I really like about PouchDB is it just gives you this changes feed. So anytime your database changes, you can just update the UI right there. And then Alchemist works with web components. I built it because I don't like React, and I learned that you could just use web components directly with very little tooling, like literally 1 kilobyte of tooling. And so this is what it all comes down to, this playground app where we create our database, we initialize Goblins, we spawn our vat, we spawn our capabilities, which involves some doing. You can see this vat.do invocation, goblins.spawn, add to guestbook. This goblins.spawn is where that become parameter comes from. And so we never have to write become. We don't have to imagine what it does. It is handed to us by goblins. But this second parameter Local DB is what shows up in those constructors as the second parameter, DB. And so what this mycaps declaration does is it associates these sort of vatified versions of these capabilities with these names so that we can hand them as capabilities to the program or to the views. And then we grab the window.custom elements, call define, set the name of our application, and then we hook it into the DOM. And there it is. Huh? Oh, crap. Okay. Okay, I'm at time, so I'm going to do my last slide. Bear with me. So I really like Spritely Goblins, but I can't let you go without touching on the big problem. Library socialism isn't a software library. It is a system of relations, and those relations of knowledge, of plenty, of work, of belonging take institutional power to uphold or to transform. There's no website and no code that can itself cause that power to manifest. That takes work that you and I, as thinking, living, breathing beings, have to do together for each other, because that is the only way that any of this gets better. It matters when architects and maintainers take concrete steps to transition power to community organizations and user groups. It matters when we make software that takes responsibility for the ethics of how we describe our world. It matters when we stand up for each other. Thank you for your time.